Hey guys! I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing about the behind the scenes drama on Charmed by now, but I got a couple of requests to look a bit deeper into certain aspects, and there was also some extra stuff I wanted to address, so I figured we'd touch on it one more time before we move on to happier subjects next week. Speaking of, next week will be a highly requested video, so stay tuned for that. In these videos, however, we're going to discuss the various reasons why Shannon and Alyssa, and also Holly and Rose, probably all contributed to the onset tension behind the scenes. And at first I thought about just doing this all in one long video so all the information was in one place, but as I expressed in the last video, the way people will just believe whatever someone says without question is just so bizarre to me. Like, most people are going to tell a version of their story that puts themselves in the best light, and in some cases that translates into twisting events, lying by omission, or just straight up lying altogether, and yet so many people just seem to go, nope, they said it, so it must be true. So I thought an interesting way to further illustrate the point I was trying to make in the previous video, that it's really easy to paint whatever narrative you want when you're the one controlling the information, would be to split this video into parts. One on why Shannon was probably difficult to work with, one on why Alyssa was probably difficult to work with, and a third one on the role Holly may have played in the conflict. I'm not going to bother doing one on Rose just because there's just not enough information there to justify its own video, but if stuff comes out in the future we can definitely come back to it. But yeah, the idea behind splitting the videos up is that if you only watch one of them, then it's really easy to believe that that's all the information you need and that person was absolutely the problem. Case closed. But if you watch the others, then it kind of shows that maybe that initial person wasn't as bad as they were painted out to be, and maybe they might have had reasons for doing the things they did. My hope is that these videos will not only serve as a more cohesive reference for those who were wondering what happened behind the scenes, because there's a lot of scattered information. I thought I would kind of make a one-stop shop for it, but hopefully they will also be a reminder that you shouldn't always take everything at face value, and that maybe sometimes it's good to question what you're being told and do a little more research or look into it a little bit deeper before taking a side. But without further ado, let's talk about why Holly might not be the neutral party everyone believes her to be. I have to admit, Holly has been my favorite Charmed actress for a long time. It's gonna be a long time. I'm sorry, that's stuck in my head. But it's not because she played my favorite sister Piper. I liked her because she seemed a lot like Piper in real life. The mediator, the one who didn't take sides because she saw the bigger picture and just wanted everyone to get along. You know, that she cared so much about the show that she didn't even take raises because it meant that money would be taken from the budget and she didn't want that. Like, it's hard not to like someone like that, but the more I hear from Holly and the more I piece this story together, the more I'm like, some of this isn't adding up. So let's dive on into it. The fair weather friend. The first thing I thought we would touch on is the way that Holly seems to be a bit of a fair weather friend. I never really noticed this until she featured on Shannon's podcast, but just look at the way Holly describes her early Hollywood friendships.
This is a long string of events. So my first husband, my first mistake, was friends with Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Some of you may know his name. And he was dating Lara Flynn Boyle at the time. So Lara was actually the first friend I had in LA when I moved there to do picket fences. And Lara knew Roxana. Roxana knew you. And Charlie was in there in the middle somewhere. So when I was no longer friends with Lara, then I became friends with Roxana, and then I became friends with you, and then Roxana became upset that we became friends.
Do you see what I mean? By her own account, she seems to move from best friend to best friend like a bee pollinating flowers. Like, you're very invested in your flower, but only one flower at a time. When you're done with the one flower, you're done. And that's exactly what I pictured when Holly was describing her friendships. You know, she became friends with Lara Flynn Boyle Then that friendship ended when she became friends with Roxanne. Then her friendship with Roxanne ended when she became friends with Shannon. And I would bet dollars to donuts, given what Shannon said about Alyssa pulling Holly away from her and creating this weird divide, to the point where Shannon cried most of season 2, that it was probably right around then when Alyssa became Holly's new bestie and Shannon was left out in the cold, much like Holly's other best friends that we know of. And this made her super upset, which rightfully so. I'm just not sure that she realized at the time that this is actually a bit of a pattern of behavior for Holly, so instead she blamed Alyssa for driving them apart and tried to win Holly back, if you will, which what I suspect happened is that Shannon was upset that Alyssa had stolen her friend, so she tried to convince Holly that Alyssa was the one driving a wedge between them, and even tried to make it sound like Alyssa and her mom were the reason that Shannon didn't really visit Holly while she was in the hospital recovering from surgery. I think from Shannon's perspective, it killed two birds with one stone. It explained why Shannon hadn't been there, and it also splintered Holly's relationship with Alyssa. So by the time season 3 started, Holly was back on Shannon's side, and Alyssa was the one out in the cold. Because I do think Shannon at least twisted that hospital story, if not outright made it up. Because remember, hospitals tend to have very strict policies, and typically only a family member, spouse, and or a power of attorney of some sort has the power to determine who can and cannot visit a patient. There is no way Alyssa nor her mother should have had any say whatsoever in whether Shannon could visit Holly or not. And like I've stated in previous videos, I've been in the hospital recovering from surgery. I know how seriously hospitals take this stuff. Like, heck, my mother and my sister, despite being listed as my family and my emergency contacts, and my sister having been my proxy, they still had to provide a code before the hospital would give them any sort of update or even confirm that I was a patient. So I cannot envision a situation where Shannon would have been blocked by anyone but a medical professional, and even then that should have been their call, not the Milanos. You know? So, yeah, like I said in my part 2 video, if Shannon comes out with a plausible story as to how Alyssa and her mom somehow had more power than the medical staff caring for Holly at the time and blocked Shannon from visiting, then I'll eat my words and apologize. But until then, I can't bring myself to believe it, and I think Holly's silence on the matter could indicate that maybe she doesn't believe it either. Or, as my sister just suggested, maybe Alyssa and or her mother did circumvent Shannon from being able to visit by Holly's own request. I never thought of it that way, but honestly, she could be right. Holly herself was very quiet when Shannon was talking about that, and she really only said that, I think it was pretty obvious that I was raised by teenage parents. I didn't have a big family, and so you're right. When a family swooped in and tried to basically adopt me, it was very seductive for me. So between that, the way her friendship seemed to work, and the way that Holly only had positive things about her experience with Alyssa taking care of her in the hospital, it definitely makes you wonder if Holly had more to do with that than meets the eye. Anyway, the point is, as it was said in this thread, Holly seems to be very much a fair-weather friend, and her loyalty to you depends on your convenience to her at the time. The minute someone else comes by with a better offer, hear yesterday's news. It happened with Laura, Roxanne, and even seems to have been the case with Shannon and Alyssa. Notice how Holly almost never seems to be good with both of them at the same time? By season 2, she had become very close to Alyssa, and she and Shannon weren't getting along. And by season 3, Holly and Shannon were good again, so they were apparently icing Alyssa out. And then Holly, despite claiming that Alyssa had sacked the deck and essentially got her best friend fired, was still extremely close to Alyssa. And she and Holly even live nearby each other in Bell Canyon. They shared horse stables, and they're just regularly photographed together and tweeting nice things to one another. It's like, clearly Holly does not have a problem with Alyssa on her own. I mean, Alyssa was even apparently invited to Holly's wedding to David Donahoe? I hope so. And not only that, but when Holly's dress didn't fit right because of her pregnancy, Alyssa called everyone she could think of and got an arrangement of dresses, shoes, and accessories sent to Holly to choose from. Like, they say that when the chips are down, you see who your real friends are, and clearly Alyssa was not the worst friend you could have. And like I said, she seems to get along with Alyssa on her own, but only when Shannon is out of the picture. Remember how Holly Marie Combs and Alyssa Milano guest starred together on Grey's Anatomy as sisters back in 2019? Well, do you know what else was going on around that time? Holly and Shannon had a falling out, and according to Holly herself, were no longer in touch.
Our relationship has had very many ups and downs that people were not always privy to. But we had a very long friendship considering who we were and the business that we were in. So even though we're not in touch anymore, I'm still very proud of our relationship and what we had and how long we supported each other through divorces and marriages and sickness and health and all of it. And sometimes you just get a little too close, and we got to the point where we were too close.
So it goes right back to that fair weather friend thing and the idea that Holly literally cannot balance friendships. And I seriously wonder how much of a role her waffling played in the tension the girls experienced behind the scenes. Contradictions. I said in my part 2 video that Holly seems to be the one who has been most consistently honest about what happened behind the scenes, but there are definitely exceptions to that, like how she said that their fighting was nothing guest stars ever noticed. But this is what Danielle Harris and Scout Taylor Compton, who are both actresses that appeared on the show while Shannon was still on, had to say about that.
Were you on when Rose McGowan or when
I wasn't
Shannon?
on. I wasn't on.
You were on Shannon's?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me how your experience was on set.
The girls were always fighting.
Okay.
They were always fighting. I was also a kid.
Okay.
I was a child.
How old were you?
I think when I first did it, I was like 9.
Oh shit.
Oh yeah, and then stopped
okay.
I was a baby.
You were a little kid,
but I knew that these women were always fighting.
Were they fighting in the makeup trailer?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the makeup trailer.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wasn't allowed in there because someone was in there, and I was always fighting.
Oh my God.
Always fighting.
So yeah, so much for the whole nobody noticed nothing approach she took. And also, notice how Danielle explicitly mentioned that Holly would be mean if she talked to Shannon.
It was not a very fun experience for me on set, that's for sure.
Okay.
But because there was a lot of fighting between the girls and like I didn't know who to talk to, who to pick,
Yeah.
It's like if I pick Shannon, then Holly's going to be mean. And then if I pick Holly, Shannon's going to be mean.
It's so funny how you knew that.
This suggests that A, Holly is not as nice as she paints herself and is willing to treat guest stars poorly, and B, that even she and BFF Shannon weren't getting along in season 1. And speaking of the dream team, another contradiction that I'd like to bring to the table is Holly essentially agreeing with Shannon that no one would believe that she would want to leave a hit show. But during the TV Guide interview that took place before the season 4 premiere, it was said that, according to several sources, it was Doherty who had approached Paramount executives last December and asked to be released from her contract, with Holly herself explicitly stating that Shannon was like, "This is getting too problematic, just let me go." She didn't want to be the bad ogress again, she wanted to exit gracefully. But the studio wouldn't have it. They stamped their feet and said, "No, you cannot leave, we will sue you." So yeah, while Holly seems to be the most honest out of the 4, that's a far cry from being honest in general. You both tried to paint it as no one would have believed that Shannon wanted to quit, and then you both put out the story that yes, that's exactly what she wanted and tried to do, it just didn't work. It's like, what? Anyway, that's pretty much it. You hear so much about Shannon and Alyssa not getting along, but Holly's role in the conflict has pretty much flown under the radar for the most part, and it's high time she and Shannon both stop acting like they're in high school, and I really hope she wasn't expecting to still have a good relationship with Alyssa going forward after essentially throwing her under the bus in Shannon's podcast, because if I were in Alyssa's place, I'd be like, really? With a friend like that? Who needs an enemy? I wonder if Holly will change her tune if and when Alyssa cuts her out. Personally, I think the best way to truly put this issue to bed is that they all do a podcast together and tell their sides of the story. Bet you anything, some stories would change and it would shine a light on who can take responsibility and who can't, but that will probably never happen. Unfortunately, most of the actresses seem to prefer talking about one another behind each other's backs, and you think they would have learned by now that that never ends well. But yeah, they just need to learn to take responsibility for their own actions, apologize to each other, and move on. So, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you found the video entertaining and instructive, and that it helps clear up Holly's role in the drama. Remember, this is just one piece of the puzzle. The other two are Shannon and Alyssa, and if you want a full picture, I would highly recommend watching the companion videos of this one. Either way, I hope you liked it. Please let me know what you thought in the comments, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are. Bye!